Dear media, dear colleagues, it's good to have all of you today here with us. I have been briefed that we already have around 100 journalists from more than 30 countries representing 14 time zones with us. It's good to see you interested. I hope you will keep your interest in Ukraine for the coming months and years. And the escalation by the Russian Federation will not be the only reason that will keep you interested in Ukraine. I will begin with remarks on the current situation with Russian buildup and will then answer some of your questions. For weeks, Russian troops continue to arrive in close proximity to our borders in the northeast, in the east, and in the south. In about a week, they are expected to reach a combined force of over 120,000 troops. This does not mean that they will stop building up their forces at that number. What is even more worrying is that it is not just troops, but also paratroopers in Crimea, electronic warfare systems able to jam communications over the entire territory of Ukraine, ballistic missiles, and some other clear signs of potentially offensive capabilities. Parallel to that, we see a massive surge in Russian disinformation. Russian state-controlled TV stations talk about all kinds of crazy stories inciting hatred towards Ukrainians among the Russian audience. For instance, one major Russian TV report called for a denazification of Ukrainians. Furthermore, Russian officials repeat propaganda lines threatening Ukraine with war and destruction of Ukrainian statehood. I want to make myself clear that Ukraine has never thought and does not seek any war or escalation. We are devoted to searching for diplomatic and political means of resolving the Russian-Ukrainian 7-year-old conflict. Many governments and media around the world now wonder, what does Putin aim to achieve with his escalation of tensions? I would like to take this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. We in Ukraine have learned one thing about Putin's actions since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 and illegally occupied the Ukrainian Crimea and territories in the east of the country. This lesson is that anything can be expected from the Russian leadership, even if we speak about seemingly irrational decisions. No one could predict before 2014 that Russia would be the first country since World War II to attempt annexation of a territory of a neighboring sovereign state. But it did. Russian military buildup taking place now is even more massive than the one in 2014, meaning we cannot exclude any scenario. We cannot know for sure whether Moscow will decide to begin a new stage of aggression against Ukraine. But it is certain that they will be prepared already to do so in a few weeks. And I want to be very clear on this, square and clear. We are not trying to say that we know date and time when Russia will cross the front line or will cause another wave of escalation on the ground. But we certainly see strategic preparations of the Russian Federation, military preparations of the Russian Federation, and it is now in the hands of Ukraine and all those who stand for the respect for international law and sovereignty in Europe to demotivate Putin from making further aggressive steps. What are Putin's motivations? I think there are three main reasons for his current actions. 2 foreign policy ones and 1 domestic. First, Russia aims to elevate pressure on Ukraine to resolve the war in the Donbas by ultimatums not compromises. Second, Russia tries to show democratic Western world that it will do whatever it decides to, and they disregard condemnations of their treatment of Alexei Navalny, sanctions for meddling in other countries' affairs, cyber attacks, and so on. And the third domestic reason is Putin's and his ruling party plunging ratings. They want to mobilize the population around their leader, boost popular support of the ruling party before parliamentary elections scheduled for this year, and curb dissatisfaction with the levels of corruption and declining quality of life. Now a few words on what Ukraine and the world can do to prevent the worst case scenario. Here are three major steps that Ukraine proposes its partners to do right now in order to discourage Russia from further escalating tensions. We call on our friends and partners to be vocal in support of Ukraine, not only in communications with Ukraine, but even more importantly, in their direct bilateral communications with Russia. Moscow should hear from every corner that Ukraine will not stand alone. Moscow should hear from every corner that it's not two sides, Ukraine and Russia, who bear responsibility for the escalation. It's only Moscow that is undertaking a large military buildup. It's only Moscow that escalates the situation. This should be very clear to them. Second, the cost of preventing Russia further escalation will always be lower than the cost of stopping it and mitigating its consequences. And I hope our friends and partners understand that. It is way more effective to clearly make Moscow understand that a new stage of aggression will have dire consequences for Russia. International isolation and painful economic sanctions. This is why, while addressing Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union yesterday, I openly called on colleagues to start considering a new round of sectoral sanctions against Russia. Personal sanctions, a tradition of recent years, they do value, they do complicate lives of some persons and business operations of some entities, but they do not stop the war. Its history proves that only painful economic sanctions can make a difference. It is critically important to signal all this now to influence the calculations in Moscow before they make decisions. It's better to do it in advance than to do too much and too little and too late afterwards. The third step, we ask partners to discuss internally how they could help Ukraine defend itself in the worst case scenario. This includes deepening security and defense cooperation with Ukraine. We have sufficient evidence to claim that Russia is now taking every effort to hinder, if not to put on hold our defense cooperation with a number of countries. The purpose of these activities is obvious. They do not need a strong enemy. They want us to be weak. But I would like to assure you that Ukraine will be ready to defend itself, shall Russia decide to further escalate. This week, Ukrainian negotiators are doing everything in our powers, together with France and Germany as parties to the Normandy format, together with OSCE as mediator in the trilateral contact group where Russia and Ukraine talk as parties to the conflict, together with the United States, together with the European Union and other partners, to de-escalate the situation. And one of the first signs of de-escalation would be a recommitment to the ceasefire coming from the Russian Federation. A joint statement in the trilateral contact group recommitting all sides to a ceasefire would be a sign that at least Russia is ready to talk and not only to build up its military forces along the border. Shall such statement be finally agreed upon and delivered, it will not mean the end of the conflict. It will not, unfortunately, mean full de-escalation, but it will be a light of hope. Though, as this phrase continues, we will all hope that this will be a light. This will not be a light from an incoming train. To conclude with, tomorrow on April 21st, Vladimir Putin will deliver his annual address to Russia's Federal Assembly. We anticipate he might make some statements regarding Ukraine there. I want to warn the world that we might hear some misleading narratives once again. He might try to present Russia as a besieged fortress surrounded by NATO and enemies. We are a country that has one of the longest borders with Russia. We do not have NATO troops in Ukraine, but we do have over hundreds of thousands of Russian troops at our border. This is a clear answer to who is threatening whom. And I would like to thank all of you and all journalists for covering Ukraine and the Russian aggression against my country in an unbiased and open manner. Thank you.
We have many journalists with us, and we will start with Amy McKinnon from Foreign Policy in Washington, D.C. So please sit down and make your question.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the Russian build-up in the Black Sea, which the statement that the State Department referred to last night in the statement. What kind of activity are you seeing? How many ships?
Yeah. So, we have to start with geography. Black Sea is deep, and the Sea of Azov has many shallows. So, to be efficient in the Black Sea, you need Black Sea Fleet, the one that Russia has and holds in the temporarily occupied Crimea. But to be fully operational in the Sea of Azov and dominate in the Sea of Azov, you need different types of vessels. So what Russia does is the following. On the one hand, they continue to their military build-up in Crimea. And we know, as I mentioned, that they brought in paratroopers. Actually, the entire military union, equal to a regiment, is redeployed to Crimea from another Russian city. And Crimea will from now on be its kind of permanent stationing. Second, they brought Iskander missiles to Crimea, and these missiles can the range of these missiles exceeds borders of Ukraine. Third, they announced exercises in the Navy exercises in the areas close to Crimea, effectively hindering trade routes and complicating security situation in the Black Sea. And on a parallel track, they announced the closure of the Kerch Strait, which connects the Sea of Azov with the Black Sea, for state-owned and military vessels. Yes, it is true that Russian authorities promised that no commercial vessel will experience any hardships in crossing the Kerch Strait. However, as you may imagine, any deterioration of the security situation is a demotivation for trade, and companies will think twice before sending their vessel through through the Kerch Strait. And second, no one can guarantee that Russians will not change their mind tomorrow or this night or in 2 days and will introduce a full block, full stop at the Kerch Strait, Kerch Strait. The last thing that is clearly demonstrates that Russia is escalating in the Azov Sea is the reported redeployment of the Caspian fleet vessels to the Sea of Azov by river routes. The purpose of that is that vessels that operate in the Caspian Sea, they also fit the sea with many shallows. And therefore, they are moved to the Sea of Azov to strengthen the military capability of Russia there and ensure its domination from the sea. These things are not common and regular practice for the Russian Federation. When you put all these elements together, you can clearly come to a conclusion from both military and security and political perspective that Russia undertakes a deliberate escalation of the situation in the Black Sea region.
Minister, we have Budapest online, Ildiko Eszterjesi from Hungarian television ATV, so please switch on and make your question.
Is that all right? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, make your question.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Minister. I have two questions. The first one is this. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, Mr. Peter Fiala, yesterday said that Hungary is interested in Ukraine becoming a strong, stable and democratic country. But on the other hand, Hungary expects Ukraine to respect the rights of its ethnic minorities, the Hungarian minority. In the current geopolitical context, to what extent is Ukraine ready for compromise in terms of minority rights, including rights for their own cultural, languages, etc., in order to improve the relations between the two countries, between Hungary and Ukraine? And the second is this: what is your honest opinion and what are the possible ramifications for Ukraine of the agreement on the modernization and license production of Irish 103 Hungary, concluded in March between Irish Innovation Complex and the Hungarian company Education Engineering PRT?
Ukraine does not need and does not want any problems with Western neighbors. They are friends. We share history with them. We share, I believe we will also share European and Euro-Atlantic future with them. There may be differences between us, but we should always be able to speak to each other in a very open way and to find common ground. And despite all the speculations, I would like to take this opportunity and say that the Hungarian community in Ukraine is an asset of this country, in exactly the same way as the Ukrainian community in Hungary is an asset of Hungary. There is nothing we should be at odds about. There may be differences. There are differences in there are differences between us and Budapest in seeing how educational rights of the Hungarian minority in Ukraine can be better ensured. But I would like to say that we absolutely want Hungarians in Ukraine to keep their traditions, to keep their identity. We want to see it blossoming in our society. They can and should remain Hungarians, but as citizens of Ukraine, as part of our society. They should also know the state language and should be well integrated into our society. I will dare to say that I enjoy very good relations with Foreign Minister of Hungary, Peter Szijjártó. We have a channel of direct and open communication. We both do politics and we understand how to defend national interests of our countries, but I think both of us are focused at negotiating a way out of this tension, a way that will not push either of us towards beyond our red lines. And I'm sure that we can find such an agreement. I have never escalated rhetorics against Hungarian government and Hungarian state. I believe that we need to remove this emotional element from our dialogue. When it comes to the contract that you mentioned, this is something that makes me feel concerned. The problem is that Ilyushin Aviation Complex is part of a bigger company. It's Russia's United Aircraft Corporation. And this United Aircraft Corporation is on the sanction list of the EU. While at the same time, United Aircraft Corporation is legally part of Rostec state corporation. And Rostec is under US sanctions. Our reading of this contract is that it goes in contradiction with the sectoral sanction regime imposed against Russian entities. And we have asked the Hungarian side to confirm whether this contract was actually signed, and we do expect that they will take all necessary measures to prevent violation of the letter and spirit of the sanction regime. When I'm asked in Ukraine whether I see any evidence of Russian influence on Hungarian policy towards Ukraine, I always say no. I do believe that Hungary is a strong country that is capable of running its own independent foreign policy. However, I must say that signing a contract with in violation of the existing sanctions regime does not play very well in our relations. It sets a dangerous precedent and demonstrates that Russia has sufficient influence to make our Hungarian colleagues sign documents which serve the Russian interests more than they serve Hungarian or European interests as a whole. Thank you.
Let's now go to Vilnius. We have Vidmantas Miševičius from Vakaro Žinios with us. Please switch on the camera.
Good day. If it is possible, is one way that Russia and Ukraine have a peaceful solution of Donbass problem. From Crimea and Donbass problem was a peaceable solution. Is possible?
Is it possible that Russia
and Ukraine don't solve this problem?
if you mean any talks that are taking place behind the backs of Germany, France, the United States, or other Ukrainian partners, no, we are not negotiating anything beyond existing formats. The peaceful solution is obvious, it's on the table, it can be based on Minsk agreements. And the trilateral contact group, together with, along with Normandy format, they did really a lot to work out in every detail, almost every decision that has to be taken and implemented in order to put an end to this conflict. And the moment Moscow switches on the green light to its representatives in the trilateral contact group and in the Normandy format, all these decisions can be swiftly implemented. So I really don't think that there is a need to invent a will, but there is certainly a need from Moscow to make a push to make so that the existing will starts turning.
Let's now go to Germany. We have Michael Backfish, I hope I pronounced it correctly, from Funke Medien. So please make your question. So again, Michael Backfish. Okay, let's go to Jacopo Barigazzi, Politica Europe in Brussels.
You see me?
Yeah.
I have a question on Nord Stream 2, first of all, whether you touched the subject yesterday talking to the foreign affairs ministers here in Brussels, and whether you ask what's your line on that to actually stop it. And secondly, when you talk about sectoral sanctions, have you also prepared any kind of list or presented any kind of list that the EU could work on? And thirdly, what is your perception after the discussion yesterday with the EU foreign ministers on their appetite for the sanctions? Because I see, for example, some countries talking about a red line, which is basically when Russia would cross into Ukraine, which seems a little bit late as a kind of deadline. And so these are my questions. And thanks for organizing this.
Ukraine's position on Nord Stream 2 is very well known and remains intact. Nord Stream 2 is a bad project. It goes against best interests of energy security in Europe. It does not help to diversify the supply of energy to the European Union. It's bad for Ukraine's energy security, but it is also bad for Ukraine's security as a whole. Because if our pipeline is emptied, then the Russian Federation will have its hands untied for behaving even more aggressively in Ukraine. We should always remember that Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 as projects of supplying Russian gas from Russia to the European Union were initiated as political, not commercial projects. And the purpose of those projects was always to bypass Ukraine. Over these years, Russia always cared for its reputation as a reliable supplier of gas to the European Union. During all the gas wars that we had with Russia, you may recall that the first accusation that they would always blame Ukraine for is that Russia is a reliable supplier while Ukraine is not a reliable transit country. Years proved that this was disinformation. Ukraine was always a reliable transit country, and the support that was extended to us in 2019 by the European Commission in the process of negotiating the new transit agreement with Russia demonstrated that the EU does consider Ukraine as a reliable country of transit. Now, if our pipeline is not needed anymore, if it is empty, Russia does not have to care for its reputation anymore. It can attack without being afraid of causing a damage to the pipeline or to the sustainability of the entire infrastructure of the gas transit through Ukraine. This is why Nord Stream 2 is not only about economic energy security. It's about hard security as a whole. I did not mention Nord Stream 2 yesterday in my address to foreign ministers of the European Union, but it is not a secret that this issue is my regular common speaking point in all bilateral conversations I'm having with colleagues from the EU, with colleagues from the United States of America, because we do understand, and many of our partners do understand, that Nord Stream 2 is not a project that will make Europe safer. Thank you.
Minister,
You had the second question.
about sanctions.
Yes, about sanctions. No, I did not register a consensual appetite for sectoral sanctions yesterday. Perhaps the reason for that is that I joined ministers on VTC. If I was in the room, if the meeting was held offline, I could have felt their appetite better. But the point is, but I really wanted to make a very clear point to all of them, the one that I mentioned in my introductory remarks. Personal sanctions, which have been imposed in recent years, they are good. They do their work, but they are insufficient to demotivate Russia from further aggressive steps. So my purpose at this point is to signal this to my colleagues in the European Union, that they have to start considering this option. They have to be prepared, because even the fact that they launch this discussion will make an impact on Russia, because Russia is afraid of economic sanctions. And another sad truth is that Russia found loopholes in the existing sectoral sanctions regime. And this is another conversation that we have to start. How to fill those loopholes instead of turning a blind eye on them. Thank you.
Minister, late night in Asia, so let's give the floor to some of our Asian colleagues. And let's start with Aditya Jaya from indonesiacompass.com. So please make your question.
Yes, thank you for the time, Mr. Kuleba. I want to ask about how is the situation in Donbass now, along the border with Russia? Because every day, day by day, there are soldiers that in the region. Is there any action that Ukraine will take by military? Thank you.
The situation on the border is tense. Ukrainian soldiers are instructed not to react to any provocations taking on the front line. Regrettably, the other side is doing everything to provoke them. One of the most, one of the proofs of that speaks for itself. Out of around 30 soldiers that had been killed on the front line since January 2021, many had been shot by snipers. And unlike a shelling, a shot of a sniper is a deliberate murder, a deliberate killing of a human being. And when we suffer a loss from sniper fire, of course our society ignites and demands harsh reaction. But we understand that they do it, they kill, their Russian snipers kill our soldiers for exactly that purpose, to achieve exactly that goal, to provoke us. And therefore we have to behave very reasonably and demonstrate restraint, however difficult it is. And no, Ukraine is not planning any military offensive or escalation or provocation from our side to resolve the conflict in Donbas. We invest all our efforts in the political and diplomatic resolution of the conflict. Thank you.
Let's now go to China. Leslie Liu, Cakes in Media. Please make your question.
Hi, Foreign Minister. Thank you so much for your remarks. I have one question. So, will Ukraine seek for military aid from NATO or other countries? Is there, if there is no guarantee for military assistance from the outside, what are the other plans for Ukraine to deter the aggression from Russia? We know that several days ago, the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany claimed that Ukraine may consider restoring its nuclear status if it can't become a member of NATO in a short period of time. So is there any viable pathways for going back to the nuclear status? Is there any plan for that? Thank you.
Well, first, even in 2014-15, when we were fighting Russian regular army in the east of Ukraine, our army was not as strong as it is now, and yet it was capable to defeat the enemy in a number of battles. Our army is much stronger now than it used to be. However, of course, sky is the limit when it comes to the strengthening of someone's defense capacity, someone's capacity to defend. And of course, we will continue our military and defense cooperation with other countries. I cannot imagine a situation when other countries will not be will refuse cooperating with us in that field. I think it's only the scope of that cooperation can be affected, and Russia is trying to hinder this cooperation in a very targeted way. For example, they do not want Ukrainian army to have sufficient number of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. So they specifically target that position in their subversive operations, in their spy games and diplomatic efforts. But Ukraine is not under arms embargo. There are no sanctions taken against Ukraine, and there is no reason to take them. Therefore, we will continue cooperating with countries from all parts of the world in that field. Ukraine abandoned nuclear weapons in 1994 in return for a promise, for a commitment, including from Russia, from a number of states, including from Russia, not to pose a threat to our territorial integrity and sovereignty. Russia broke that promise. However, since 1994, Ukraine has never broken or has indicated its intention to break the commitment we undertook in 1994 and restore our nuclear arsenal. In the interview of our ambassador to Germany that you referred to, our ambassador simply said that you should not take his words out of the context, because what he said was that he tried to explain that Ukraine is in a desperate situation now, seeking for security in the current surrounding, and but it is not the intention of the state of Ukraine to deviate from the commitments it signed up for in 1994. However, we expect from all countries, including China, to take all efforts to help Ukraine make Russia abide by its commitments taken in 1994 and promising security to Ukraine. Thank you.
Let's add one more continent to our geography and go to Algeria for Mohamed Mekelti from the daily Le Journal Independent.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first, why not promote the dialogue with Moscow to definitively resolve this crisis? Have you tried doing this? The second question, please, relate to another topic. What is the fate of Algerian students imprisoned in Ukraine for more than 10 months? Thank you.
Can you please repeat your second question?
What's the fate of Algerian students imprisoned in Ukraine for more than 10 months?
Yesterday, the conversation between advisors to leaders of the Normandy format, which is Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany, lasted for 3 hours. And unfortunately, they did not reach any joint decisions because Russian representative was not sufficiently constructive. My president has requested a call, had requested a call with President Putin recently, but we never heard a response from Moscow. I requested a call with Foreign Minister Lavrov some months ago, and he never came back. And this all happened just in the last few months. So I believe this is an answer to your first question, why Ukraine and Russia cannot negotiate this solution. Ukraine is willing to negotiate this solution. There are formats for those negotiations. And if Russia is willing to reciprocate in a good, faithful manner, I'm sure we will be able to reach an agreement. But unfortunately, this has not been the case so far. I'm not familiar with the case that you mentioned, Algerian students. I will instruct my people to find all relevant information, and you will receive the answer through through our press office. Thank you.
Let's take one question from Financial Times, Ben Hall.
Hi, thank you very much. A couple of follow-up questions, actually, to questions that have already been asked. Can you tell us from the meeting with Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron last week, appetite is sanctions? You've commented on. I'd like to know what your take was from those discussions with Paris and Berlin. And secondly, has Kiev made any specific requests to the US for defense equipment? And do you think the Biden administration is going to be more forthcoming to such requests than the Obama administration? Thank you.
Sectoral sanctions is not a matter of appetite. It's a matter of time and Russia's behavior. And from my recent interactions with German and French foreign ministers, and I can conclude that they understand this reality. In the meeting between my president, President Macron, and Chancellor Merkel, they all agreed that Russia has to be deterred, and they did not go into specificities, but all capitals are considering appropriate ways of doing so. As EU members, both France and Germany have an experience of imposing sectoral sanctions against Russia in 2014, specifically after the downing of MH17 by Russia. So it's not like it's not about opening a Pandora box or setting a precedent. It's just about using an instrument that proved its efficiency. Yes, we did have a very a very good conversation with Secretary of State Antony Blinken 2 weeks ago in Brussels, or a week ago in Brussels, and I shared with him some very specific needs, specific and urgent needs of the Ukrainian army and of Ukrainian defense sector. I do not have any indications that the United States do not think that it is worth helping Ukraine, but of course everything depends on details and on further development of and on further behavior of Russia in these circumstances.
We have time for one more.
I think I missed one question. You asked 3 questions and I only covered 2. What was the question in the middle, the second one?
I don't remember either.
No, I apologize. So if you send it to us, if I missed something, and you can send it to us, and I will respond to you in written.
Let's go. We have Chile with us.
Okay,
Christian.
Chile, and then we are done because I have to run.
Okay, good. So Christian, please, your question. Yeah, Christian Scott from Nueva Diplomacia. Please make your question. Okay, we don't have Christian with us, so Natalia Churilova from Radio Freedom in Prague. Do we have Natalia Churilova with us from Radio Freedom in Prague?
We don't. This is it then. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your interest in Ukraine. I hope I covered your questions. I will provide written replies to those questions which which were addressed to me, but I was not able to answer. Thank you for covering Ukraine. I hope that everything will be fine in the coming weeks, but that depends on all of us, on politicians, on military on the ground, but also on journalists. So once again, thank you for covering Ukraine in an unbiased manner. Stay safe.